It's Friday, everyone. What do we do on Fridays here at the Hint Hive? That's right, we smash the patriarchy. Hey there, Hive Queens and Allies. Welcome back to the Hint Hive, Amplifying Women's Voices, where we dive deep into the topics that matter most to women today. I'm Kelly Hint, Queen Bee of this hive, your unapologetic feminist life coach and psychotherapist, here to help you navigate life's complexities with a mix of science, sass, and sisterhood. Today's topic is heavy but oh so important. We're talking addiction today. Whether it's you or someone you love struggling, this episode is all about understanding addiction, breaking down the stigma, and learning how to heal. Because no one gets to rewrite your story except you. And in true Hint Hive fashion, we're putting a special focus on how addiction uniquely affects women. Because, no shock here, society often overlooks us in this conversation, and that's just not going to fly here. So grab your tea, coffee, or kombucha, and let's get real. So, what is addiction? It's a chronic condition that affects the brain and behavior. It is not a lack of willpower or some moral failure. It's rooted in how your brain's reward system works. When you engage in certain behaviors or substances, whether it's alcohol, drugs, food, or even shopping, your brain releases dopamine, that feel-good chemical. And over time, the brain gets used to that dopamine hit and craves more, making it harder to stop. And let's just bust a myth right here. Addiction does not look the same for everyone. Some people function at a very high level while secretly battling their addiction, and others may experience significant disruptions in their lives. Both are valid struggles. And here's the thing. Addiction doesn't play out the same for women as it does for men. Women often face unique challenges that make both addiction and recovery much more complex. And again, I'm not trying to do the one-up game or, say that women are better or worse than men or blah, 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 blah. Not going there. That's not the point of this episode. I am highlighting how addiction affects women. So let's break it down. First, let's talk about the biological factors. Women's bodies metabolize substances differently than men's. For example, we often feel the effects of alcohol or drugs more intensely and faster, even with smaller amounts. This means that women are more likely to develop an addiction more quickly, a phenomenon called telescoping. And then we've got hormonal influences. So hormones like estrogen can amplify the effects of certain substances, making them more addictive. Women may also turn to substances to cope with PMS, perimenopause, or other hormonal changes, which can create a really dangerous cycle. And then there are mental health connections to addiction. Women are more likely than men to experience co-occurring mental health issues like anxiety, depression, or PTSD, often stemming from trauma, abuse, or societal pressures. Addiction often becomes a way to self-medicate these deeper wounds. And then we've got the social stigma and shame. Women often face harsher judgment when they struggle with addiction, especially if they are mothers. And again, I can attest to this firsthand because I worked at an addiction clinic working with people who had both mental health and addiction challenges. And when a person was a mom, they were judged so much harsher. It was incredibly sad and incredibly frustrating to see. Because for some reason, Society expects us to keep it together for everyone else, so admitting that we are struggling can feel impossible. And then there's barriers to treatment. Again, let's be real. Women often have less access to treatment. Why? Because we are juggling caregiving responsibilities, facing financial challenges, or worrying about how seeking help might affect our careers or custody of our children. So those are just a handful of how addiction affects women. And I'm sure that anyone listening who can relate to this topic has another handful or two more. All right, let's put our psych hats on for a second. We're going to talk diagnostic criteria. So according to the DSM-5, which is like the Bible for mental health diagnoses, there are 11 criteria for substance use disorder. The first one is using larger amounts of the substance or for longer than intended. This often looks like, I'm just going to have one glass of wine, but then you always finish the bottle. And the next criteria is wanting to cut down or quit, but not being able to. And the next one is spending a lot of time either obtaining, using, or recovering from use. So that includes going and buying the thing, using it, and then whatever potential hangover or impairment you have as a result of using the substance. And then the next criteria is cravings and urges to use the substance. And all of these lead to the next criteria, which is failing to meet responsibilities at work, school, or home because of your use of this substance. And then the next criteria is continuing to use this substance despite problems in relationships. So if your family members are telling you, we've got a problem here, I'm concerned about this, and you seem to have all kinds of people telling you that this is a problem, and you keep using the substance despite there's a voice in the back of your head saying, you know what, maybe this is a problem. And then this often leads to the next criteria, which is giving up social, occupational, or recreational activities. You're just not doing the things that you used to enjoy doing because you are using the substance instead. And then another criteria is using in dangerous situations, such as driving, whether it's taking a lot of opiates and getting behind the wheel or drinking that bottle of wine and getting behind the wheel. So that is a criteria. And then the next one is continuing to use despite physical or mental health problems. So for example, if you struggle with depression and you keep using alcohol, even though it creates an even deeper depression, or if you have cirrhosis of the liver, for example, and you continue to drink, knowing that that's deadly. So that's another criteria. And then the next criteria is developing tolerance. So this is where you need more and more of the substance to get the same effect. So one line of Coke used to get you where you wanted to be, and now you have to do 2 lines of Coke to feel the same way, 3 lines of Coke to feel the same way. 1 glass of wine got you there, and now all of a sudden you need to drink an entire bottle of wine to feel the way 1 glass used to make you feel. And then the final piece is experiencing withdrawal symptoms when not using. This is very common. People with opiate addictions, for example, the withdrawal symptoms from opiates make you feel like you're dying. I worked with a lot of people who struggled with opiate use, and the withdrawal often keeps people using because there's severe vomiting, diarrhea, body aches. It's almost like having the worst flu you've ever had. And so they continue to use to avoid that withdrawal. So there's 11 criteria for a substance use disorder. If somebody meets 2 to 3 criteria, then it's considered a mild substance use disorder. And if they meet 4 or 5 of the 11 criteria, it's considered moderate. And then 6 or more criteria is severe. So if you find yourself or someone you love in these descriptions, it's okay, because awareness is the first step towards healing. For the listener struggling with addiction, let me speak directly to you for a second. If you're finding yourself checking off some of these criteria, know this: you are not broken and you are not alone. Addiction is a condition that can be treated. Recovery is not about perfection. It's about progress. It starts with acknowledging the issue and reaching out for help. This could mean talking to a therapist, joining a support group like AA or NA, or seeking treatment at a rehabilitation center. Here's the badass truth. Asking for help is one of the most empowering things that you can do. It is not weakness. It is strength. And ladies, let me speak directly to you for a second. If you are struggling with addiction, addiction does not define you. It is a chapter in your story, not the whole book. If you're using substances to cope with the impossible expectations that society places on us, whether that's being the perfect mom, the perfect partner, or the perfect professional, it is time to rewrite those expectations. Recovery for women often means addressing not just the addiction, but also the underlying emotional, hormonal, and societal factors driving it. Therapy, support groups tailored to women, or even programs that consider caregiving responsibilities can be life-changing. Now, if it's someone that you love and care about who's struggling, that's a whole different layer of complexity, right? Here's what you need to remember. You cannot fix them. You can support, but you cannot save. They're not broken. They need assistance. They need support. The other thing to remember is you have to set boundaries. Love does not mean enabling. It is okay to say no when their actions hurt you or others. And educating yourself about addiction is so incredibly important, because when you learn about addiction, you can approach your loved one with compassion and understanding. And of course, the next piece is to take care of you. Supporting someone with addiction can drain you emotionally, mentally, and even physically. Self-care is not selfish. It is survival. There are resources for you too, including groups like Al-Anon that focus on supporting those dealing with a loved one who is struggling. And of course, let's not forget therapy or coaching services that can also be incredibly helpful and supportive. And for those loving a woman with an addiction, if it's your mom, sister, partner, or friend who's struggling, your role is crucial, but not as a savior. Here's how you can help. Be a listener, not a fixer. Women often carry so much emotional labor. They need someone who will hear them without judgment. and encourage treatment, but do not force it. A gentle nudge toward women-focused support groups or therapists can go such a long way. Because when it comes to addiction, if you give ultimatums and try to force it, any progress will be very temporary. The woman you love who's struggling with addiction needs to come to that conclusion that she needs to do this for herself. And that goes for anyone struggling with addiction, to be very honest. And also, the last piece here is to be patient. Recovery is not linear, and there will be setbacks. I actually ran a relapse prevention group when I worked at the addiction clinic, and one of the sayings was relapse is part of recovery. And somebody who is freshly sober does not want to hear that. That's usually why we put them in that group later on into their recovery, because they knew a little bit more that relapse is a likelihood, to be very honest. And so if you have a loved one struggling with addiction, remember that if they relapse after a period of sobriety, it's not a failure. It's an opportunity for them to learn a little bit more about their addiction. And same goes to you, listener. If you are the one struggling with substance use, if you have tried and tried and tried, and you've pieced together days, hours, moments of sobriety, but then you fall back into addiction, it's to be expected, especially if you are doing this without support, which is why I encourage you. I'm desperately encouraging you to get out there and get some help in whatever form you can. Because again, even with the biggest supports, relapse is possible. And it is not a reflection of who you are as a human being. I promise you that. It is simply the fact that addiction is a disease, and it's a very, very powerful disease. And so I'm going to encourage every single person listening, if you're not someone who struggles with addiction, please, please have compassion for those who do. You don't have to like their actions or behaviors. You get to be mad at them, but for crying out loud, have compassion knowing that they are fighting a battle that you know nothing about. If you do not struggle with addiction, you cannot possibly understand what these people are going through who do struggle. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight this. A significant number of women battling addiction have a history of trauma, whether it's childhood abuse, domestic violence, or sexual assault. These experiences leave emotional scars that substances can temporarily numb. Recovery isn't just about quitting a substance. It's about healing those deep wounds. Trauma-informed care is vital. And if you're in this boat, please seek out a therapist or program that specializes in it. I can promise you there are programs and therapists out there who will embrace you lovingly, with compassion and open arms, and they will not judge you. I can tell you that some of the most meaningful work that I have ever done in my career was helping people work on their addiction and the underlying causes of the addiction. And I lost some people along the way. There were people who didn't make it. addiction won. And if you're listening to me right now, I don't want that to be you. So let's talk about shame for a moment, because addiction often comes with a mountain of it, especially for women. Society expects us as women to be nurturers, caregivers, and somehow immune to struggle. But addiction does not care about gender. Addiction does not care about societal expectations. So what we can do is ditch the judgment and embrace empathy. Because again, I have worked with some of the most special humans on the face of this earth who were battling this horrible, horrible disease. They deserve love and compassion. They do not deserve your judgment. So please, please find your compassion. Now, having said that, I do need to say, if you are in a relationship with somebody who's struggling with addiction, you do not have to put up with unhealthy behavior. You are allowed to say, I can't take this anymore. And if you don't get help, I'm going to leave. Because you deserve to take care of yourself also. I just really want to highlight that you shouldn't stay in an unhealthy relationship just because you have so much compassion for the person who's struggling with addiction. Because again, while compassion is important, so is your safety and well-being. There have been many people that I've worked with that have had to leave relationships because the person they were with was very, very unhealthy and creating a lot of chaos in their lives. So again, I'm not trying to say that you have to stay with somebody who's struggling with this. That's where it becomes really, really important to remember that you can't control other people's behaviors. You can only control yours. So really, whether or not you stay in that relationship is up to you. And it really depends on how much you've got left to give in that scenario. All right, enough with the heavy stuff. I don't want to make anyone cry. Okay, here is your quote of the week, Hive. And it's from an unknown author. The strongest women aren't those who have never struggled, but those who've faced their demons and found the courage to rise again. Ladies, let this be a reminder. You are resilient. Every single step forward, no matter how small, is proof of your strength. All right, before we wrap up, here's my challenge for you this week. If you are struggling with addiction, make one brave move today. Whether it's calling a therapist, telling a trusted friend, journaling your feelings about this episode, or just admitting to yourself that you want to change, it's a step in the right direction. And if you know a woman battling addiction, reach out with compassion. Share this episode, send a supportive text, or offer to help her research resources. Let's normalize these conversations and break the stigma together. And, as always, join our Facebook group, the Hint Hive Podcast. It's a safe space where we can have these tough conversations without judgment. You are never alone in this journey. All right, that's it for today, my fierce and fabulous friends. Remember, addiction is not a weakness. It is a battle, and battles are won with strength, strategy, and support. And don't forget, healing is not linear, and progress is still progress. Until next time, Keep amplifying your voices, owning your power, and fighting for your healing. This podcast is powered by Kelly Hint Empowerment Coaching, as well as Kelly M. Hint LMHC and The Cranky Counselor. To find out more about coaching services, head over to CoachKellyHint.com. If you'd like to know more about the psychotherapy services I offer to individuals within the state of New York, you can check out KellyMHint.com. And if you'd like to learn more about aromatherapy, you can check out TheCrankyCounselor.com.